Good. So first of all, thanks everybody for joining us. 12 Community Safety Initiative and the Canadian Mental Health Association for a presentation with the mighty Karen Gallagher Burt today. First of all, we're going to talk land acknowledgement. So 12 Community Safety Initiative believes in community and inclusion. So as 12 CSI continues to work on reconciliation, we begin meetings with land acknowledgement, and we encourage other organizations within 12 communities to do the same. We acknowledge that 12 communities are on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, and Blackfeet Nation, south of the US-Canadian imposed border. In 1887, the area signed Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsuut'ina First Nation, and Stoney Nakoda, which is Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley First Nations. And I'll point out, I'm very proud of this. We had a member of the Bears Paw First Nation, Ina Wesley, who has translated our traffic safety videos into Stoney Nakoda. So our first one is actually on YouTube right now. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do go to YouTube and search 12 Community Safety Initiative. So we're eventually hoping to have 4 different Indigenous languages with those videos translated. So we're very, very proud of that, and I wanted to throw that in there. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis, Inuit, and visiting Indigenous nations status and non-status. So without further ado, you came here to see Karen, and we know that. Karen is a rock star. I've known Karen for many years, and we share a love of Liverpool and Liverpool Football Club, and that's what keeps us going. That's what keeps our friendship going. She's a director of philanthropy and stewardship at the Canadian Mental Health Association Calgary region. Her portfolio includes communications, fund development, and community events, which have been probably pretty slow for you during the pandemic.
Been pretty slow. Yeah, lots of virtual ones, but not much in person.
Yeah, looking forward to those starting up again. She's got a graduate degree in social work and spent her career focused on children, risk, and mental health. She's also worn many hats, but doesn't like labels. Her accomplishments include being a 37-year life partner, mom to 50 children, a community connector, political nerd, and mental health advocate. I can speak to the political nerd part, absolutely. She admits to having a complicated relationship with coffee and wine. I've shared a coffee with her.
We have. We shared breakfast.
Yes. And if any of you get the wonderful opportunity to listen to Karen on Wednesdays with Matt and Sarah on the radio, Matt always likes to start out with, "You're looking good, Karen." But in this case, since it's not radio, it's very true. You're looking good, Karen. And thank you very much for joining us. I'll take it away.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I mean, for me, it's really critical that CMHA has made some time during the pandemic to really do some of these public sessions. I'm doing a lot of them through the United Way. We're offering them at lunch hours and really get a chance to talk to folks as we all go through this very complicated journey with mental health, particularly during the pandemic. So as Larry mentioned, my background is social work. I have a master's in social work, and I did it all late in life. I did all my education in my 40s, so diploma, degree, master's, and I did it while my husband and I were foster parents. So we have 2 genetically born ones, 2 homegrowns as I call them, and then we have brought in another 46 foster children in our home, and then 2 of my son's friends have regularly lived with us. So I like kids. And I really have learned a lot through that experience as a foster parent. It propelled me to become a social worker. When I saw the families that really oftentimes it was about the inability to parent because they hadn't learned it. And as we talk about our Indigenous population and we think about the fact of the schools where they were pulled away from their family, there's multi-generations that have been impacted by that parenting. That's not to say that all our foster kids were Indigenous, but a good portion of them were because of some of that experience. So I really appreciate the land acknowledgement. I am good at talking a lot, but I honestly am tough at reading the chat. So I've asked Larry to pay attention to the chats for me. And I am going to pull up a PowerPoint, but I tend to sort of talk about it. I don't really read them very well. So bear with me as I pull that up, because it's always joy. Have I got share screen opportunities?
I better do that right now.
Uh-huh.
Let's Make co-host.
Thanks. Now you're in trouble.
Why am I not seeing it there? Sorry, folks.
That's okay. Technology. We're learning.
You did it? Okay. Daphne bailed me out.
Yay. Thanks, Daphne. I
Mhm.
think Daphne's your right-hand person there for everything.
The right
Sounds
and
like.
the left. Yeah.
This is good.
Mhm.
So what I'm going to do is I got a quick PowerPoint to pull up. I want to make sure that I get the right one. Oftentimes I pull up the wrong PowerPoint and share this. And really what's been interesting for us during the pandemic is really talking about what's been going on with all of us with our mental health. Is it coming up fully for everyone?
Yes.
Yes, good, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Really talking about it's been a shared experience, and that's probably one of the first times in most of our lifetimes where we've had this very interesting shared experience of mental health. Some of us to greater or lesser degrees, but it's been something that we've really observed in the world right now that I would say that every single one of us has had some challenges with our mental health. Could be very simple and easy, as I said, it could be a little bit more difficult. Often when I talk about mental health, it depends where I'm at, what group, I have people say to me, well, why is this so critical to talk about it? And I'll get into that a little bit and about one of the good things or some of the good things we've seen in our world around mental health. So my goal today is to talk a little bit about kind of the differences between mental health and illness, a little bit about that shared experience with COVID, a little bit of stress and healthy coping strategies, and we will do a couple exercises. I know I find them really helpful, particularly at the end of the day to de-stress from the work side of things. And then a little bit on self-care and self-compassion, and finally a bit how you support yourself and others, noting very much first it's you, then it's your people, and then it's your community. So always starting with yourself is one of the critical ones for that. So why do we talk about it? It's an interesting conundrum for me that actually I don't love that we talk about mental health. I wish that it was switched, that we just talked about health and we accepted the fact that our environmental, our spiritual, our mental are all components of our health journey, whatever that looks like. But we have to bring up mental health because of the history of stigma and the history of really it being before it was diagnosed, being put down as things like hysteria, being put down as the terms mad or crazy. And what we have learned so much in the last 30 years is that mental health is really part of all of our lives, and it really impacts our circle of people, but also ourselves indirectly or directly. And I always think about it in communities and in organizations, companies, not-for-profits. We like to talk about mental health for obviously because it's our work, but one of the things that always sort of triggers me is that when you talk about mental health, it comes down to understanding a little bit about the language. It's understanding the journey side of mental health, that it's not a one and done kind of thing for most mental health concerns, although sometimes it's situational, and really paying attention to the difference it can make for you just to tweak a few habits in there if you're not at a point where you need more intervention than that. So it's really important for me to sort of put that context there, and then also remind folks that if we look at how mental health is, I guess, would be served and treated and funded in our society, it is one of the lowest funded of all the governments, and we're talking federal right down, although Calgary is in a wonderful place with having a current mayor that is very excited about his mental health and addiction strategy. So for me, that's a big changer, is that we are seeing some differences in conversation and dialogue, and places where people can actually be a little more honest about what's going on for them with their mental health journey. So when we think of mental health, we kind of give it two kind of polar sides. So for us, mental health is really about you're doing well, everything that's happening for you with kind of your mental health, your thought processes, your behaviors, all of that really is able to get you to reach your potential. You're able to cope with life, everything that comes to you from life. And hopefully, I always say this is success, is able to make a contribution to the community. As someone who's raised all these children, one of my big things has always been what makes me a successful parent? What am I looking for? And my job is to raise functional adults and to have people that participate in the world. people who have great skills, people who can be good partners, and then folks that find some way to be part of their community. And when you're mentally well and mentally healthy, that's where you can go. When we go to mental illness, and this is not what today's going to be about, but mental illness is really something that's diagnosed. So everything in between is mental health, and that's the space I play in. Mental health diagnosis can only happen with some of the medical practitioners, obviously our doctors, psychiatrists, and many of the clinical social workers, psychologists. They're the ones that can pull out the lovely DSM that we use and do the diagnostic for mental health disorders. And when we think about that as a disorder or an illness, it really is a condition of the brain where your thinking, your moods, your behaviors, are in distress a little bit, and your functioning in one or more areas of your life has been impacted. And that's what we kind of see as mental health being where we go. And I know that for me, mental health has always been, how am I doing in my everyday life? And I like to examine it daily, weekly, monthly, and annually. My husband and I do a New Year's Eve annual thing where we talk about our lives and where we're at and the highs and the lows throughout the year. And one of the things we talk about is mental health. And I'll share a little bit about that as we go through. But for me, that's really, really critical. So I always think that you need to talk about the economics. And this is fascinating to me because these statistics are in 2008. So in 2008, there was a complete study done on the impact financially of folks who have mental illness in Canada on all of the systems that are involved, such as the medical care systems, the not-for-profits and support. And when it came up with $51 billion, and we believe that's a low estimate, it was very interesting to see the reactions from some of the big organizations, the corporations, who thought, this might be something that we really need to pay attention to because it impacts their bottom line when their employees are off on mental health leaves or they're struggling at work. We all call it the absenteeism, but there's also a presenteeism where you are there, but you're not really there. And that's something I think all of us have experienced through the pandemic as well, very much around that. So when we think of 51 billion, you've got lots of things combined in there. But on an average, and this has probably changed since COVID, on an average, 500,000 people in Canada don't show up for work this week because of mental health issues. So half a million people will not go to work or not attend it virtually, whatever it is, because they're struggling with their mental health. And I would not even guess, I know that during the pandemic, that number has increased significantly for all of us. And I think particularly for those who are in frontline work, be they healthcare workers or folks that are working at our grocery stores and in our banks and all those places, I think we've all had some of that experience. So when you think about that, sorry.
Can I ask you a quick question on that?
Sure can.
So when we're talking about the people that have taken time off for mental health, is that self-diagnosed or like are they asked to say that's why they're doing it?
Do you know what? Honestly, it's a mix, but I would say predominantly it's not self-diagnosed. It may be people that are stressed, and I think that part's gone up during the pandemic. I think there are much more people needing it and asking for that break. But before that, it was a lot of folks that actually had diagnoses. And it's interesting, one of our board members at CMHA, he kind of works in the benefits side of things for a large oil and gas company. And he shared with me that those applying for, say, short-term disability, generally speaking, prior to the pandemic, the number one reason people went on short-term disability was because of musculoskeletal injuries of some sort. That has shifted, and the number one people are going on, reason is for mental health or concerns. So they've seen a big change, and a lot of companies are stepping up and paying attention to this because they recognize not only is it good business, but it's really, really important to keep your employees healthy and to keep them feeling like you're supporting them in their journey. So it's really interesting transition during this particular time. So when we talk about mental illness, lots of folks want us to sort of define it. Is there a particular population? Is there a particular gender or a gender that you identify as? Is there a particular, and quite frankly, there isn't. Mental health knows no demographic. Everyone can be impacted by a mental health challenge at any given time. And if you haven't been, then probably someone around you. And the numbers we truly see, and you'll hear us talk about 1 in 5 with mental illness in their lifetime. But once you add in the substance side of things, it's 1 in 3. So in this room today, we have 7 people. And so at least 2 people in this room will experience a mental illness or a mental health disorder or an addiction issue throughout their life. And so I'll take one of those. I'm experiencing a mental illness right now. And I'll share a little about that as we go through and finish a bit more. So it's not a demographic, it's not one person, and it really is an interesting combination of those genes, that biology, go back to that nature nurture argument. Those things are all contribute. But we also know now that on the biological side, it could be a lack of some of the chemicals that you produce in your brain, but also trauma. And trauma that we've all faced in our lives. If you have a significant number of traumas in your life, it's highly likely that you will experience a mental health concern, and most likely that you will experience some health disorders earlier in your life than if you didn't. And that's been some amazing research that's been done in the States by Kaiser Permanente, which is a health company, a private health company. And they were very interested in why folks, when some folks got sick in their 30s and 40s and others didn't, when they had some similar lifestyles and behaviors. And what they discovered is that the folks that got sick early, and this was with things like diabetes or heart concerns or high blood pressure, the folks that got sick early had usually experienced three or more traumas in their life, particularly in their childhood, at times when their brains were developing. So we're starting to see some of that work come into our understanding of how people and why they're experiencing mental health concerns at different points in their life. So I want to do the pandemic side. And this has been one of the fascinating things for me, not fascinating necessarily in a good way, but just fascinating to comprehend what's going on and how you can sort of objectively look at things within the pandemic. So you've got 6 different stages of disaster response up here, but I want to give you an example and walk through how this kind of applies to our mental health side of things. So this research all comes from some place called SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration in the States. So they're like the biggest health organization, probably close to in the world. I would say that probably some countries are a little higher, like India probably has a larger one, but in the North American or Western countries, they would definitely be the highest. So they've done some really cool research, and most of this came out of response to emergency situations. And this was more about disaster. So think back to the flood in Calgary in 2013. This absolutely could be applied to that occasion, or to the fires in Fort Mac. But it also can be applied to the pandemic. It also can be applied lots of time to the response to a war and within our society, that there's multiple things that happen there. So I want to lay on this chart the pandemic and about how we've been responding to it. So if you look on the left, where at the bottom there's emotional lows to emotional highs, and then across the bottom is just a really quick timeline. So let's go back right to, say, January, February last year. At that time, we were starting to hear things about COVID. We were hearing about it, some cases in Asia, some cases showing up in Seattle, some cases showing up in the UK, and it was pretty sporadic, and they could trace a lot of it back to travel, and they started to pay attention to it, just like they did with SARS years ago, or H1N1 when it came through. So January, February, we were hearing a little bit about it. And then we started to recognize probably towards the end of February, that we were really in a tough situation, and things had to change very quickly because the numbers were going up. So we started to see it as a threat. It went from a warning to a threat, and our emotions started to come down. And then we had the impact. And I'm not sure what your day was. My day was March 13th. March 13th was the day that I recognized that this is way longer and way more impactful than I ever imagined. And March 16th was my last day in the office full time, and our organization shut down all of our services in our main office. We did not shut down our other programs that involve housing and congregate living, but all of our other services were shut down briefly, and we scrambled like everyone else to figure out what was going on. So we had that impact in March, and we all, figured out what it looked like. We all thought it was short term. We'd probably be dealing with it for a month and a half. And so as we got a bit of control, we kind of moved into this hero stage. So think of the flood when everybody came out to help everybody. In the hero stage with the pandemic, what it was I started to see it in my world of philanthropy, where it was less about dollars coming in and more about individuals reaching out to help. I don't know, I think I had 3 dentists call me or my organization and say, we can't be open right now. Can we donate to you our masks and our gloves? And we started to see these little moments of heroism come out. And I love this phase only in the aspect that you see the goodness and the kindness in people and the genuine desire to help each other. And so that went on probably through April, May. And then in the summer, we were really cohesive now as a group. We'd had this hero. We're now in the honeymoon phase. And if you recall, last summer, we were still socializing. We were doing it outside. We had restrictions, but it wasn't heavy on the masks. And we managed to do all kinds of connections. And it really didn't feel so bad last summer. And then disillusionment, we're taking stock of what's going on. And then a trigger event happened in September of last year. And what it was our kids went back to school. And whether you have humans in your life that attend school or not, having that many humans go back to an environment that had possibilities of spread because of the close contact, everybody got a little bit nervous. And I think that we started to see people feel a little more anxious around that. And then we started to see these big swings. We had the Thanksgiving one, we had the one after kind of Halloween, and we started to see these big impacts, these kind of phase 2 of the pandemic. So all these trigger events kept happening, and you can see that the emotion stayed very low. And I hate to tell you, but we're still in this phase. We're still in disillusionment, and it is most definitely the longest phase. Generally speaking, I'd say it was a natural disaster. It could last from 6 months to a year. And we've been there since September, so we're coming on 10 months where we've been in this phase. Eventually, we will move into a reconstruction, and that's when the mental health echo pandemic will begin. Because when we move into reconstruction, it now becomes time to deal with our grief and our loss. When I think of the flood again, for me, the flood afterwards was the people afterwards that looked at their homes, the 100,000 people that had been taken out of their homes and had to move for the flood purposes. It was going back and seeing the devastation and seeing what all of us are experiencing. And that's going to happen with mental health. We are going to see an increase in people hopefully reaching out. And that's a big part of these conversations is, taking the stigma away as much as possible. And we're going to see, I think, a little bit of a change in our society and how we support it. We see some things ramping up right now for supports, but for me, I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned that there's not going to be enough services for everyone because mental health has been so underfunded before. I can't see us being able to have the capacity. And that's where we come in as individuals. And it's us learning some techniques and some tools where we not only take care of ourselves, but perhaps can be some of that resiliency factor for other folks that are working through the grief. So eventually we get to reconstruction. There probably will be some setbacks. I know all of us have different opinions regarding how the government has handled it. I know for me, I'm still in the phase where when I go out in public, particularly in places like grocery stores, I wear my mask still. And I'm probably going to stay there till at least September and then see what happens again as our kids go back to school. Because I'm just not comfortable yet that we're out of it and that we won't have something else happen. Another, I don't know, what would be number 4? I can't even count them now. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, a few times along the way, it's been a train. Eventually, it will be a light that goes out into the sunshine and we can see all the good things again. So I'm going to pause there just for a second because I know Larry's monitoring the chat. Does anyone have any questions when we talk about this or kind of the phases that we've all been in?
Feel free to unmute, folks, if you
please ask. There's a small group, so I'm open to conversation. Honestly, very open to conversation. Cool. No one's got anything yet. That's okay. Feel free to jump in if you want to talk about something.
Well, maybe when we're talking about masks, Karen, maybe let's
Yeah.
talk about sort of that feeling. I attended a Stampede breakfast and I showed up with my mask on, and well over 90% of the people there didn't have masks on, weren't social distancing, anything else. So maybe talk about some strategies of people feeling like they're, one in 100 still wearing their mask, and
Well,
and sort of that social piece.
first off, change your friends. And I'm definitely being sarcastic. It's an interesting conundrum because we definitely have people that are in the no mask, not necessarily anti-maskers. I think that's a whole different group. But in the, okay, we're out of it, no masks, I've got my double vax. And based on science, they're probably pretty accurate that it's okay to go without. I think when you get in busy places, it's a little more difficult. So irregardless of where you are on that continuum, it may cause you anxiety when you're going out. And I know it does me when I'm going out and I know that it's going to be a crowded place. I have in the last week gone into a store and turned around and walked out and left. And the reason I've done that is because I've seen so many people without their masks, but also because my anxiety has raised up. And I'm in that moment where I think I don't want to be around this many people. I have an autoimmune disease. I don't want to take it home. I don't want to give it to someone in my family. Even though we're all double vaxxed, we're at that place where the anxiety component of it is real. And I found that the difficult part is that folks want to, I think they judge on either end of the spectrum. And I've kind of gone back into my head and say, okay, I can only do what I can do, and I can follow the behaviors that I think is okay. And for me, that's still taking the safety factor into consideration and my community. And for me, it's all about other people. It's not really necessarily about me. It's about, I don't want to be that one that happens to pick it up and give it to someone else. That would devastate me. So certainly the anxiety around that is difficult for many of us. And I think that'll be there for a while. I actually think we're all going to experience some anxiety. If you have been a person who has been working from home, I think particularly as we transition back into whatever it's going to look like for us, hybrid, 2-3 days, whatever it is, I think lots of people are feeling that. And in our organization, we're not inviting people to come back into the office until September. And part of it is because we work in mental health, and we know that our staff is anxious, and we know that they're struggling, and we are deciding that we're going to wait a period of time and give people that, time to sort of feel that they're a little bit safer and that things are moving in the way that they feel comfortable. And then come September, we'll reevaluate. And many folks, if it really is difficult for them to come in around numerous people, we won't have them come back to the office. We'll find a way to accommodate because that's really critical. So I think the theme for 2020 into this year has been a theme of grief and loss. And I use those words very deliberately because grief and loss certainly can be something that triggers mental health concerns. And it could also be part of having a mental health challenge and then the grief and loss sinks in. So I want you to sit with you for a minute, and I want you to think about this last year and a half. And the worst end of the scenario has been that you've lost someone to COVID, or you've had it yourself, or you've been super sick. And I think the illness part really takes precedent over that grief and loss because you've lost health, perhaps someone has died. But then if you go from there down to the lighter end, and prior to this, Larry and I were talking how lucky we've been that we've stayed safe during the pandemic. We've stayed employed. We've been very lucky. My husband has benefited from the government money, and Larry's wife has benefited as well because we couldn't work in their jobs. But I think that the grief and loss is everything from losing a job, losing your connection to people, but it's also those little micro celebration moments, the birthdays you've missed with people, a baby being born, hugging your family. I know for me that's been really challenging to be separated from family. And last week we did our first trip up to Edmonton to see my in-laws. We stayed in our trailer. We didn't stay with family. We socialized outside. But I remember the first time I hugged my mother-in-law, and I haven't seen her for 18 months, and I could smell her perfume. I burst into tears. I was just that was been such a loss not to see them in the last year and a half, other than through FaceTime or Zoom, which has been hilarious to watch 80-year-old people figure out that. But we've all experienced grief and loss. And I invite you to sort of think about that and think about what that impact is in your life or within your family, whatever that looks like. And what have you lost this year? I think of the kids that haven't graduated high school together. They haven't done a formal grad. And in North America, that's a big ritual. And that's what's missing. The word ritual talks about those things that we rely upon. They're sort of transition stages for us. And those rituals have been crushed. But I do think that the theme for mental health, particularly going forward, is going to be these 4 R's. So I didn't steal the 3 R's from recycling, or actually there's 4 there. But for me, it really is about focusing on the resiliency we've all had, moving into that recovery stage, whatever it looks like. But I think we've all refocused a little bit on how we want to shape our life going forward. If you've had the privilege to sort of think about it, was the life I was living exactly what I wanted? Was I just caught in the wheels of life? And I know for myself, it has made a big difference to how I want to proceed with the rest of my career, how much I want to be out of the house, how much time I want to spend with my husband. All of those things have become very more important to me during the pandemic than before. And then trying to figure out what that looks like as I reclaim certain parts of my life, but choose not to participate in others that have not been helpful. So comparing the two, I do think, and I do feel optimistic, really optimistic, that that's the space we're moving into. If we can just get through this summer and not have too many things happen with COVID, I think we're moving towards that phase. But here's where we are. With all of that happening, we are all physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted. We are. I talk about Zoom fatigue all the time. I struggle right now because I can't see your faces. It's just me down at the bottom of the screen. I miss people. I'm tired of computers. I'm tired of not being able to see the people that are in my life. I'm tired of not being able to do the activities I love, like go watch football games and go to concerts. I'm really tired of those things, and I'm not feeling that I'm doing as well as I'd like. And saying that, during the pandemic, I actually have I've been diagnosed with depression. And depression frequently shows up with anxiety. My language, this is just mine, I call them fraternal twins, that when Joe shows up, then Jane shows up as well. And you may experience one to a greater degree, which is often the case. But for me, the two have come hand in hand. And last August, about 5-6 months in, I actually imploded a bit and had to take a little bit of time off work and had to get some medication, which I'm still taking, to sort of support my own mental health. And that's been a really critical move for me. And I've never had this experience before in my life. And I'm 57 years old, and I'm really struggling with my mental health. The medication's helping, lifestyle helps, but it's come out of the pandemic, and I own that and share it being vulnerable, because I think it resonates with a lot of people. A lot of people are feeling that. So when we talk about anxiety and we talk about depression, most folks go down the path, and those are diagnosable. Sometimes you feel depressed, but it's not a diagnosis of depression. But we all experience, I'm going to use the term stress to capture kind of many feelings that we have, but kind of what happens within our body. And if you think about it from the pandemic perspective, we were living in that place of threatened. We were all fearful. We were all worried. We all imagined what it could be like. And some of you may have actually had COVID. So our brain was in this constant stimulation where we were on guard for what could be happen. And we didn't go back to that normal side of things as often as we usually do. So we stayed at an elevated level of stress throughout all of these months. So number one, that's a concern, because your brain can actually really start to get a little bit depleted on some of the chemicals that it needs when you're constantly hypervigilant. And when you're in that stress phase, I always look at what's happening within my brain particularly, because I know that some of the chemicals have already had a challenge in my brain based on what I'm experiencing now. So stress is really normal. When you have it, the cortisol, and I won't do all the sciencey stuff, but the cortisol in your brain increases and is released. And whenever we feel a threat or we're placed in a situation that demands outweigh our resources, I think that's really critical, or our ability to cope. That's when the stress stays up there. When our brain perceives it, our bodies release those hormones. So it really is a direct connection from brain to body, and it fuels what we always call the fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm going to add in a fourth F word. And no, it's not that one, Larry. And I would say it's fate, because many of us respond with absolutely, not only do we freeze, but we just remove ourselves from the situation. So I look at those four things and I think about when I get response to things, and mine is definitely a short-term freeze, and then it becomes agitation. Agitation is what I feel, which comes out in my statements go from, as my children would say, I go from speaking in into bullet points to speaking in bullets, because I become very, very direct, and I lose my softness. I lose some of my empathetic words, and I just become anxious, and I start to limit how I connect with folks. So you think about all those hormones in your brain. Some of them are ones that we like, and some of them we need them. Like you need that cortisol in certain stress situations. If you go back to cave person times, you had someone hunting for the local saber-toothed tiger or something, and you were constantly in an adrenaline for that moment, because you did fight or flight really in those situations. And our brain got used to having these ups and downs, but they were limited. They went up for those experiences and then they came down regularly. The pandemic has not given us that. So all of these neurotransmitters are releasing dopamine, epinephrine, which is like adrenaline. All those are being released in our head. And we're using less of the happy hormones, which is the dopamine particularly. That's your feel-good hormone. We may not be experiencing some really good reaction to that at the same time. You hear about other ones. You've heard probably about serotonin. That's the one that helps you regulate your sleep and your mood. Oxytocin, which is called the love hormone. Oxytocin is one of the ones that women release, particularly after having babies. And that's part of our bonding with our children. And men can release oxytocin too, as part of that affection side. And we've all been removed from affection. We haven't had those physical contacts with people if that's important to you. And then the last part is our endorphins. And endorphins really, they're the natural pain reliever in our body. And so we've kind of used them up. We're experiencing all kinds of pain, and we've used a lot of those endorphins. So we try and look at having more natural mood boosters as much as we possibly can. So this is one of my techniques. And I, as I mentioned, I struggle sometimes with the anxiety side of things. I'm more likely to move into the less about the sadness and more about, with my depression, it's an inability to function with certain things. It's the tiredness, it's the fatigue, it's the not being able to get out of bed, but then at nighttime not wanting to go to bed. Really not wanting to shut my brain down, knowing when it needs to. So when those things start to happen for me, I found this technique works really well. And I honestly can't remember where I got it from, but I actually will say to myself, halt. And the other thing I do is I put my hand up to my mouth, which forces me to shut it, number one, but it's also a signal to me to start thinking and to sort of stop using your mouth and start using your brain. And the first questions I ask myself are these four. Am I hungry? Am I angry about something? Am I lonely, or am I tired? And if one of those things come up, that's when I know that I have to take a break from whatever it is that's agitating me, and remove myself from an environment or a situation and take some time to calm myself down. And when I say calm myself down, it's all of my parasympathetic system, my breathing, my blood pressure, those things. I need to calm them down and set aside and take some deep breaths. If I'm hungry, that's easily solved. If I'm lonely, most of the time I can solve that. Tired, I can usually solve. Angry, sometimes you got to look at what that's about. And I look for, who can I talk to? Or I can relax when. And I really enjoy what? I feel my best when. And I start to ask myself those questions, both before and after, and say, okay, what are the things that I need to really counteract those feelings that I'm having when I'm struggling to cope? Really looking at what is in my toolbox for my resiliency. I see a couple of things in the chat. I don't know if there's a question there because I can't see it. All good?
No, we're just saying hi to Australia.
Oh,
Glad to
cool.
hear from
Welcome, Australia. Boy, you're in a whole different zone. So when we think of stress, again, stress is normal. We all experience it. Everybody has an experience of stress throughout their life. And if you deny it, I will call you a liar. When we think about the stressors, for me, it's about compartmentalizing and sort of assessing which ones I can control and which ones are within my realm of decision making, and then which ones are outside of my control. So again, using the pandemic as an example, I'm in control of my behavior. I'm in control of my education, of the information that I choose to take in, where I get my medical information, reliable sources. I'm in control of those things. I am not in control of other people's behavior, except for, say, at a work environment where I can turn around and say, you're required to wear your mask. So those kind of things where I really look at in environments when I'm at, I mentioned that big store I went into, there's people, I can't control that. So if I enter into that, I'm just going to increase my anxiety. So I'm much smarter to just turn around and walk away and sort of say, that's not within my control, and I don't want to put myself in that place. So in the pandemic, we could not control our lack of social isolation and interaction. We really saw an increase in folks coming to CMHA, and I would say other mental health services such as the Distress Center, because the loneliness really sunk in for people. For us, the foundation of mental wellness is connection, belonging, and that leads to hope. And those are the three things we all need to keep our brain healthy. And when you don't have that social interaction and you start to experience that isolation and loneliness, that's when really that connection and belonging starts to go away, and you're finding other ways to connect. But I don't know about the rest of you, but the online doesn't work for me. It's not helpful for my brain and for my stress levels. You also can't control the response to the virus. You can't control those other people, and you can't control the government. The government's going to make the decisions they make, and we're going to comply with them, hopefully as best we can. And that for me has been an interesting conundrum, because I frequently haven't agreed with some of the decisions that have been made. So the response to the virus outside of me. And then I am going to give this one to the women particularly, although I know many men fill the primary caregiver role. I do believe that the big load has rested on women in lots of cases. And I switched it from the mother load winning gold to the mother load, where we've taken on an extra layer of care. Even myself, with not having small children, my youngest is 31, I have experienced the stress of trying to manage things in a household where 4 adults are wandering around in here in a small bungalow and on each other's nerves, but all of the things that have to be taken care of. Everybody's eating 2-3 meals a day. There has to be more groceries. The laundry is bigger. I save money on shoes. But outside of that, everything has sort of come up, and it's more and more of things that I find that I need to deal with. And that's been an experience for me, is really for a first time in a long time, pushing things off on the other 3 men that live in my house. It's no, you need to take on that responsibility, because I can't cope with it. I'm still working full time and I have other things in my world. So it's been an interesting one. So I look at those stressors outside of my control as something to really pay attention to. But what can you control? And for me, the magic ones, particularly the top 2, have been ones that I have really struggled with, because I use social media as a way to connect with the world, as a way to promote my organization, as a way to, I think, experience a lot of good things in Calgary. But the social media has been awful during the pandemic, and I have had to limit my social media times and shut myself down on the weekends. I don't know if any of you are experiencing that. I know I already have LinkedIn, I have Facebook, I have Twitter, and I have added in TikTok, which I'm primarily watching, not doing anything on. But all of these things that are all screen-based, and they're constantly agitating my brain. My brain's constantly working. So I have really had to filter on social media, and I've learned how to block people on Twitter that I don't want to see anything. I learned that during the Trump era, that anything that came up with the word Trump in it, I just blocked on my Twitter. And it was very, very good for my mental health to not see anything about that person. Then the media and the news consumption. I'm a person that usually watches the news at 5, and then I watch it at 5:30. and then I watch it at 6. So I get the local, I get the national perspective, and then sometimes I watch it again at 10 o'clock. And that's just me. I like what's happening within, and I like to know what's going on in the community. And what I have noticed, and this is pretty common, is that a lot of the announcers, a lot of the folks that are hosting the shows, the news shows, they don't write the material, but the material is written in such a way that the language is very, very triggering. They won't say that there's been an increase in cases of coronavirus. They'll say cases are skyrocketing. They won't tell you that, there's been, only, I don't know, I'm making up numbers here, but only 5% of kids in school got coronavirus. They won't tell you that. They will tell you that a whole class of grade 3 students are sick. And so they always sensationalize it. And that has been really difficult for me. And I've noticed my husband and I in our conversation have become super negative for a period of time. We would feed off what was in the news and we'd say, that's ridiculous, those kind of things. And we actually got to a point where we stopped watching the news. We started taping it. We would tape the 5 o'clock news, 5:30 news and the 6. And then we wouldn't watch it at supper time. We would watch it in the evening and we'd forward through anything about COVID. We just said, we can't do this anymore unless it's something that comes to me in emergency. We need to take that language away from us and that sensationalization and allow ourselves to come down. And then we don't watch the 10 o'clock news anymore because we weren't sleeping. We found that that was a big one for us, is that our sleep patterns were off, as many of us were. I mentioned the Zoom fatigue and the online fatigue. The beginning of the pandemic, I was having a blast with some things. I have family in Liverpool, as Larry mentioned, and a bunch of my family in the UK. On Saturdays, we were doing quiz night, and we would all get on Zoom, and I would get on in the afternoon. They'd be on at 8 o'clock. They were all drunk. And we'd play quiz night, and we'd do different things. We'd sing on there, and we did it every week. And then we did it every second week. And then we did it once a month, one time, and then we stopped. And really, for me, what it was is that I just can't do this for fun because I have to do so much for work. And it became something that is not enjoyable for me, and I prefer not to do it. And then the other things that you can control is your own behaviors. Lots of people talk about gaining that 10, 15 pounds at the beginning of COVID, and I was guilty of 10 pounds. A lot of Miss Vicky's chips were eaten by me during that time frame. But by summertime, when we went into that more of that honeymoon stage, I recognized my behaviors and stopped back into my healthy behaviors. So I can't go swim. I can't do some of the activities I like a yoga class. But I've been doing some yoga at home. I've been doing a lot of walking in my neighborhood, and my dog is very happy with me because he gets 2 walks a day. And so having to pay attention to those health behaviors. And the other part has been my sleep patterns, particularly because I'm not a good sleeper to begin with. I think I live in a permanent state of fear of missing out, or FOMO, as they say. So I naturally only sleep 5 to 6 hours a night, but I've probably on average now been sleeping 4. I didn't go to bed till 4 o'clock last night and was up this morning at 8. And that's happened quite frequently for me during the pandemic. So I have to try and control that and make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to sleep well. And that has included a medication. So I had to add that into my life. So what kind of strategies can you use to sort of take yourself down and look at what you're controlling in your own life and maybe your family's life if you have that influence? I do a lot of work around labeling my thoughts. When I said that HALT thing, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired? I do a lot of pulling out the thoughts when I have those instant explosions of anger, anxiety, frustration. I try and do a physical step back and say, okay, what are you feeling? And give it a word. I look for that feeling word. And if I can't find the right one, then I know that I'm sort of beyond where I need to be, and I need to take a bigger step back and see what's going on. We automatically, when we start to label our thoughts, we put them in categories. And so you'll have the ones that are happy ones, which we've had less of, and then a lot of the other ones which are negative, which leads to some thinking that could go right down the path of catastrophizing. I can't believe I said that right. Catastrophizing and creating stories in your head. And that's part of anxiety, that we tell ourselves stories in our head. We create our own truths. And one of the things we know is that if your brain believes it, and your brain is talking about something with you, then you actually feel it and you experience it. So you create the negative story, it becomes your reality, and it starts to manifest in the physical symptoms in your body with all kinds of things. I try and stop the process. So I've got a lot of mental tricks that I bring in, such as the alphabet game. And this was actually something I did when I was a kid. We used to juggle balls on the wall, and we did A, my name is Anne, my husband's name is Andy. We come from Alberta and we sell apples. And then we would go to B, we'd go to C, we'd go to D. And it was just a way of, as kids, we used it just as a rhythm when we juggled. But for me, it's a way of stopping my brain and stopping the anxiety path, basically like taking the hamster off the wheel. And when I take the hamster off the wheel, then I'm more likely to calm down and get back to a better state. The other one about counting backwards, I'm pretty good at that one. So I have now inserted learning to count in multi-languages. So I've now got about 12 languages. I didn't know how to count from 1 to 20 on average, and I'm trying to perfect it and get it a little longer. But doing that and moving myself into that, okay, I need to go do it in Mandarin or something, go off to the side, is really quite fascinating, because it also makes me laugh because my pronunciation is terrible. So finding those kind of things. And when you do something like that that requires your brain to focus and it's fairly fun, you're stopping the wheel. You're stopping that hamster wheel for a brief period of time, which allows you to think about it. Some
Karen,
folks,
do you do
yeah,
that out loud, or do you do that in your own head?
sometimes I do it out loud, which makes it very uncomfortable for my husband. But I generally it's in my head. Generally it's within my head where I'm doing it and counting backwards. I like to do it out loud because obviously with learning new languages, pronunciation is pretty critical. And in your head, you're not actually hearing it. So for me, when I hear it, it's a bit better. It's combining those senses, right? And the last one about writing it down, that's one of my magic ones. One of my good things that's come out of COVID is that I have spent so much time doing creative writing, writing poetry. I've done some really good posts, I think, on LinkedIn about some of my experiences. And I've really got into that writing space again that I've sort of let go for a long time. Once upon a time, I wanted to be a fiction writer. And I've written some things during this pandemic. None of them are really worth publishing, but little bits of things that remind me that I like to use that part of my brain. And I've actually read books that are not work related. I've actually read a few fiction books again. And I got an account automatically with my Amazon account for Audible. And I get a free book every month that I download on that. And I have paid for a couple of them so that when I go for my walks, I can listen to something. And it's a different one of your sensory organs that you're using, because most of what we use is our eyes. When we're looking at things like screens and talking to each other. So when I do the walk and I do something that's completely in my ears, it allows me to sort of come out of a different mental health space and calm down, quite frankly. And then sometimes it's 80s rock, depending on the mood I'm in, and 80s rock makes me walk faster. So those are just some of the ones that I would suggest that people consider. So we look a lot at, again, we're going back into what you can control. So if your ultimate goal in the middle is having some healthy coping strategies, we're not saying that you have to be completely mentally well all the time, but what are your coping strategies? How do you balance things out? And we'll talk about wellness and what that looks like. And then what are you practicing for self-care? We're going to talk about self-care and self-compassion because they're two completely different things, but both critical to our well-being. So as I look at what I do and what will take me to a healthier space, I look at some of those self-soothing strategies first and foremost. I like to comfort myself. Those include things like a cup of tea, very British. A cup of tea is a calming mechanism for me. Listening to the sounds of nature. So if I can't get outside, then there's some fabulous channels on YouTube, and there's some great things on TV I can listen to. So those are the kind of things I use for self-soothing. I can't do some of the other things I like getting a massage. Those things are not available. Some of them are now, but I'm still hesitant. And then distracting myself, but doing it intentionally, taking those intentional breaks. I get to this computer in the morning. I'm at my computer by 8:30 usually, and I probably don't leave this computer until I have to go pee. And then it's a rush to the bathroom and a rush back because the meetings are back to back. At lunchtime, during this pandemic, I have made myself take a lunch break every single day. And that's when I go for a walk with the dog. And usually, if my husband's around, he goes with me. So we get a bit of a break from the house. We get outdoors. and I get some physical activity because my body is aching from sitting. So really setting those intentional breaks from things. And on that note, one of the other things I've done is adding in at nighttime, shutting down all technology and all TV an hour before I go to bed. And that is for me a way of taking all those distractions, but there's all kinds of research and science behind the lights on your computer or the lights on your TV really being difficult with your brain. That's why they suggest you do blue lights or change your screen. I've just taken the task of an hour before bedtime, none of these. So then thinking about who your people are. And I always say to folks, when people will say to me, I don't have very many people in your supports, I ask them if they have a phone to look in their phone and say, who's your top 10? Who are the people that either you have in your favorites that you can phone them for free or they're easy to find? Who are the folks that will show up for you no matter what? They're the people that show up when you're at a bar and you got drunk and you need a ride. And they'll show up and pick you up. They might say you owe them something afterwards. That's what my family would do. But they will show up for you and they will be there for you. And that's been a critical part of most of us for our success and how we're dealing with things. And then the last one comes back to those that talking to yourself and that identifying the feelings that are going on. Really building up some of those strategies that you can use depending upon where you're at. If you're in that anxious mode, if you're in that depressed mode, again, not diagnosed necessarily, but really starting to feel some of those feelings. What are the things you can do? Everybody deals with stress. Everybody deals with problems. And coping really refers to how you change your thoughts and your actions to cope and manage them when things are threatening or really difficult. So other things for me include trying to be positive, trying to have a moment of gratitude every day. I do practice thinking of something I'm grateful for every night before I go to bed. Paying attention to my body. And when my body says you have to move, you have to sit, I have to get out of that position. You have to get something for your feet because I'm very short. Paying attention to the signals my body's giving me. And then communicating my feelings, not just with myself in terms of that identification, but in communicating with the people around me. And for many people, that's been an interesting one during the pandemic because lots of folks don't have great communication skills, and sort of growing those skills is really critical. Other things, and I'll just give a few really quickly, trying to be objective with things, focusing on one thing at a time. I used to identify that I was a brilliant multitasker. I've since discovered that that's not really a good trait to have. So really learning to look at one thing at a time and planning things out and be in the moment with whatever it is you're doing, be it a work thing, be it enjoying a meal, but really focusing on one thing at a time. So no phones while you're eating, no TV while you're eating, sit down and taste your food. Other things are like making some new connections. I do a lot of celebrating my successes, and then all of these, just like you hear yoga, these are practices. And they use the word practice for a purpose because we don't always get really good at them, but we practice them. I'm hoping that's not true for doctors when they say they have a practice. I'm hoping they're not practicing. But for mental health, it really is something that we have to practice some of these techniques to get into habits and patterns. It takes about 28 days to either create a new habit or to change a habit. And that right now, we've had time. And so there's been some interesting folks that I've heard that have done some miraculous things with their body, their health during this time. People that are running marathons that couldn't run before, people that have lost weight, and then people that have gone back and taken courses for school. I am not one of those people that learned to bake bread until last month, but I did, it was one of those things that I'm going to do something new to support my own brain. So lots of those things that will be different for each one of us. So I want to pause for a second because I am going to ask you to do a bit of an activity with me. And this is not something obviously I created, and it's actually came out of some work with kids, but it is used with adults as well. And it's one of those ways of sort of stopping your brain and allowing yourself to be present in the moment and to stay calm. So I use this a lot when I get anxious about things, when I need to refocus. And I mentioned about breathing. When I get anxious, as most of us do, I don't breathe deeply. I do not use my diaphragm. I do shallow breathing and I catch my breath, and I notice it because I start to cough. I will breathe very slowly and then all of a sudden it'll be, and I realize that I'm not breathing properly. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment. You're all by yourself in your space, your cameras are off. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment wherever you're sitting. And if possible, put your feet flat on the floor in front of you. And as you sit there, I just want you to get comfortable in whatever you're sitting in, your chair or your couch, whatever it is, and lean back a little bit in your chair and make note of the feeling of the chair underneath you. You can feel the pressure on your buttocks. Perhaps you're in a corner where you can feel it on your side. Maybe you've got good armrests like I do in my chair that I'm sitting in. But just experience what that feeling is within your body of being grounded. And that's the term that's used for this. I'm grounding my feet, I'm grounding my body, and I will ground my mind at the same time. So once you're comfortable in that position, I'm going to ask you to take 3 deep breaths. And I will do it along with you. And I like to do breathe in to the count of 5, hold for the count of 7, and breathe out to the count of 6. That's my number. Lots of people know it in different numbers, but for me, that's what works. You do whatever works for you, because breathing, you know how to do that. So take a deep breath. And let it out and make a noise like yoga. Make a bit of a noise, exhale it out and feel it empty. And then do it 2 more times. And when you do that, you might feel some calming within your body. You might feel your blood pressure lower a little bit. I know that I always feel that I'm not racing as much when I take some good deep breaths. So now that you've done that, take your hands and you can either cross them over your shoulders or you can put them on your lap or your 2 legs. And what we're going to do is a little bit of what's called EMDR. And it's a way to sort of help you kind of move through things. I'm not going to go into the details of EMDR. I like to do it over my arms, and I will do it so that you can see me. And what I want you to do is I want you to sort of tap your shoulders just one at a time. And just pick up a rhythm that's comfortable for you. So you're still breathing, and you're tapping your shoulders or you're tapping your legs, whatever that looks for you, one at a time. If you're in public, this might feel a little funny, but the tapping the legs can work. It's much quieter. So now we're going to do the 5 sensations. So as you see there with the hand, it shows you the vision, the touch, the hearing, the smell, and the taste. So you're breathing, and we're going to walk through them one at a time. We'll start with, I want you to see 5 things in your room and look around and look at each one for 5 seconds. Focus on what's in your room. Now that you've seen 5 things, I want you to notice 4 things that you can feel. So you can feel your feet on the ground as one. You feel my breath. The air entering my nostrils. Now I want you to focus on 3 things that you can hear. It might be the traffic outside. Maybe you have a dog barking. You hear my voice. Now this one's a little trickier, but if you can smell 2 things. So I can smell my tea. Tea is comforting to me. And I can smell the body cream that I put on this morning. I can smell my lotion. And the last thing is one good thing that you can taste. And you may not have something with you. I carry mints in my purse, particularly for this. So when I need to calm down, I've got a Tic Tac or something I can throw in my mouth. Optional, you can sort of think about something you can taste or your favorite taste. When you're done that, just put your hands on your legs, and I want you to take 3 more deep breaths. And now take note of how you feel. Do you feel a little calmer? Did you breathe too heavy and you feel lightheaded? Is your breathing a little slower? Are your feet uncomfortable on the floor? Do you need to move them? And then just slowly allow your body to sort of open up like a flower. I sound like a yoga person. And really kind of relax. And so that took us less than 10 minutes. And when you practice this, and I love the 5 fingers because I can remember sight, touch, hear, smell, and taste. And with knowing that, I start with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I can practice this absolutely anywhere. Again, when I tap, I tend to tap my legs if I'm in public. If I'm at home, this is much preferable with the EMDR techniques, is to tap your shoulders. But honestly, it doesn't matter, whatever works for you. So I hope that you feel a little bit less stressful and a little calmer. And that's a technique that I use on a regular basis, particularly during the pandemic. When I have been out somewhere and the world around me has made me feel like I am just too exposed, then this is something I've used, often sitting in my car. Or before I go into something, or when I come out of a place, I will stop and calm myself in my car and do this technique. So hopefully that worked a little bit for you. Not all techniques work for each person. I regularly talk about meditation, but I can't do it. I can be present and in the moment. I can do visualization, but I can't meditate thus far. Maybe I'll get it eventually, but I struggle with it. So it's finding which one works for you. What kind of calming mechanism is perfect for you? And it could just be breathing. Breathing might be it, and breathing and tapping. That might be something that sort of helps you out. So consider what that could look like. So I want to, oops, did my computer stop working? Oh, my slides stopped working. Uh-oh. There's a little panic. Let's see if I can stop share and then come back. Oh, well, I guess I have to be done. I think on the last ones, the last couple of slides that I had, and particularly for me, are kind of about the art of self-compassion. And I'm going to stop sharing just so I can look and see folks and see myself. And if anyone wants to turn their cameras on, please feel free to. But one of the things I've learned through all the work I've done, whether it be an intervention with suicide, whether it be children and families at risk, and now working directly in mental health, is that one of the things that we experience when we are somewhat the caregivers and taking care of everyone else is that lack of self-care for ourselves. But the other part of that is self-compassion. And they're very, very different. The self-care is very much about the things we do for ourselves and to make ourselves feel better. Self-compassion is how we talk to ourselves, and it's the language that goes on in our head. It really is focusing on expressing some of that goodwill and good feelings to yourself that you usually express to other people. And it is not just affirmations like saying, I am strong or I am whatever. It is really sort of cradling our soul, cradling our being and saying, I deserve to be taken care of emotionally too. I deserve to have that time and care for myself. I need to change my language in my head. I talk beautifully to everyone else, but all of us default frequently to talking negatively in our heads. So for me, it's that default of I'm going to crush that negativity and I need to talk in a positive way. Self-compassion is where we mindfully accept that this moment might be painful, and we embrace ourselves inside, and we give ourselves kindness and care, and in response, remembering that being imperfect is part of the human condition and part of living, but really practicing what that looks like for us. The last thing I will say is that you can have a lot of impact in other people's lives, and that would be using the power of observation. I love when everybody has their cameras on because I can see their faces, I can see their body language, and I love being in person because then I can see lots of things. But with the pandemic, I think the visual on the computer, thank you. And then also having really focusing a lot on listening to people. For me, that's been really critical in being in a good place. So observing other people. So taking a look, do they look stressed? If whether you're in person or not, you can sometimes see that stress in people's faces. People don't get angry when you ask them how they're doing, but you have to switch from saying, "How are you today?" Because we all answer with one word, "I'm fine." That's generally how we answer. And saying, "How are you doing in this moment? How are things for you today only?" And then stopping and listening. And that's the tough one for me. That's hence the hands over my mouth to make myself shut up. About asking and listening how people are really doing. It's not about probing. It's about creating space and openness for them to actually share. The big thing about that is that my mother always said you need to use your eyes and your ears, or your mouth and your ears proportionally. You've got one mouth and two ears. So you use those twice as much as you use this. And then offer yourself to listen to people. This is not a time to give people advice. This is not advice giving. We offer suggestions, we offer observations, we offer considerations. I have noticed in the last few Zoom calls, to one of my staff, I might say this, that you appear to be really distracted. Is everything okay? Is something going on that I can help you with? I've observed in the last staff meeting that you kept checking your phone. That's not like you. Is something going on that you need to talk about? So it's noticing things and changes in behaviors, and that's the key thing when other people might be unwell, is noticing the changes in behaviors. And then what you need to do is practice that art of listening and giving them a place. Know what your limits are. If you're not comfortable in the mental health world, if you're not comfortable asking about things like suicide, don't go there. But that's where you can be a partner with someone and say, "I'll walk with you on this journey. I don't know what to do if you feel that dark in that place, but I'll phone the distress center with you and I'll be on the call with you. I'll go with you to the doctor's office. I'll help you talk to whomever." And it's walking with someone, not making the decisions for them on their journey, unless they are in an active state of really mental health crisis and they need full support. So that's part of what I like to do, is really focus on paying attention to other people. This goes beyond my loving to observe people in the airport. This is really observing people for kindness and for that ability to open up and ask questions. And that's a good thing since the pandemic. I do notice lots of people more openly sharing how they're actually feeling, and then other people getting more and more, I don't know, I guess convinced to sort of say, "I'm not doing so well today." And it's been a tough one for me. As I mentioned, I'm in that place where I've had to honor it. And then now I'm kind of in this place in this disillusionment phase. It's been defined by, there's a really good article in the New York Times about, New York Times about where we are. If we're not mentally ill, we're not unwell, but we're not good. So we're somewhere in the middle, languishing somewhere in the middle. And that languishing becomes this state of flux where you can't really feel good, you don't really feel bad, you don't know what it is. And I encourage people to read this article. It was published on April 19th this year by a gentleman named Adam Grant. And it really is about that languishing being a place of stagnation and emptiness. And I think that's what a lot of us are experiencing, not being ill, but not being well. We're sort of stuck in the middle. We're kind of like the middle sister or the middle child. We're stuck in that place. So if you're feeling any of those things, I honestly, the first thing I invite you to do is reach out for help. CMHA, we're on all the Twitter things, all those things, but most importantly, we are available daytime hours for anyone that might reach out and ask for support. We have a peer support program, and I'm very proud of that program at our organization, where we support and train people with lived experience of their own journey with mental health or substance use, or someone in their family, and they've been that partner and that support person. We take folks like that, they apply and we train them, and then they come work for us, a lot of them. And they also work at the hospitals, they work with other not-for-profits, where what they're able to do is use their lived experience. And it's a magical moment where they can use that lived experience to support someone else with what they're going through. Because they usually know a heck of a lot more in that moment than your doctor does about the services and the places that are out there. So I always encourage people to access our peer support, and it is available Monday to Friday. I'm not sure the hours now. I think they're about 10 to 3 or 4, and they do have one day that they're doing it a little bit later, and they're also available on chat. If you need to stay anonymous, they're also available on that. So I want to thank you for your time and being here. I know we're a small group, but I like when it's a small group because I know it's people that really have an investment in this for their own purposes. Maybe it's your mental health or someone in your life, or really just to sort of take yourself away from something else today and be a participant in this. And all of those are good reasons to be here. I hope you learned something. I hope you will use one of the techniques. And if not, do your own research and find some things that work for you. And I'm going to leave it there and see if there's any questions. Larry, I don't know if you want to take over and moderate this. We've got a small group, so I don't think we need to do that.
Yeah, thanks,
Zoreen
Karen.
or Maylee, I don't know if you want to turn on your camera.
I wanted to share one thing, and then I also wanted to offer to the crowd if you want me to stop recording, if there's if there's a reason to share something really personal. So I think I'll finish it up and then stop recording, and then you can ask your questions. One of the things that came to mind when you were talking about the self-care and the self-awareness piece, and it's a
compassion.
Yeah. The one of the pieces of advice that really resonated with me, and I share it with anybody, especially when they're grieving, is give yourself permission to feel how you feel. There's no right way to feel when you're grieving, but this could go on at any time, and if you're feeling down about anything, give yourself permission to feel how you feel. So,
you know what, that's a great piece of wisdom, Larry, because I think people rush through things and other people rush you through because they're uncomfortable with them. And that's other people, honestly, they'll push you through an emotional experience because they don't feel comfortable with your behavior, your language, or your whatever your loss is. And because we've all experienced so much, truly allow yourself to sit there and then move forward when you're ready to move forward. And remember that grief's a cycle, but it doesn't follow a cycle all the time. Grief goes back and forth and up and down. It's not, the traditional one where we talked about, there's the sorrow and the loss, there's kind of the anger, the frustration, there's different things that you go through, but it's not linear and it's not circular. It just happens in different ways, and we're all different.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I'll leave it there. I'll thank you formally, Karen, for what a wonderful presentation. I can't wait to share this with my new ambassadors tomorrow. We have a new ambassador program that we're doing here on International Avenue, and we're in the training mode. So this is something that definitely they can use tomorrow morning. So they can say hi to me tomorrow morning when they hear this. So thank you again. And as I said, I'll stop recording and we can stay on here for a little while if anybody has any questions for Karen.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers with my tea. It's not hot anymore.